The billionaire boss said, "Never touch me," but froze when she kissed him to stop crying. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew the rule from day one, but rules were made to be broken. The elevator climbed 47 floors in complete silence. Sierra Hollow pressed her back against the cold steel wall, watching the numbers flicker past like countdown to Judgment Day. Floor 38, 39. Her fingers traced the edge of the leather portfolio clutched against her chest, feeling the weight of documents that could make or break million-dollar deals. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the man waiting in the penthouse office, the man who had built an empire while keeping the world at arm's length. Ding. The doors slid open to reveal the executive floor of Callaway Biomedical Technologies. Glass walls stretched endlessly, offering a panoramic view of downtown Manhattan. Sierra's heels clicked against polished marble as she walked past empty cubicles. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Monday, early enough that most employees hadn't arrived yet. She paused outside the mahogany doors marked CEO D. Callaway and took a breath. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette, tall, rigid, already immersed in work despite the early hour. Draven Callaway never seemed to sleep or eat or do anything remotely human. Sierra knocked twice, sharp and professional. "Enter." His voice carried the weight of authority that had intimidated Fortune 500 executives and government officials alike. But Sierra had worked for him for 8 months now. She'd learned to read the subtle variations in his tone, the micro-expressions that betrayed thoughts he'd never voice aloud. She stepped inside, immediately noticing how he positioned himself behind his desk, always a barrier between him and anyone who dared to enter his domain. Draven Callaway at 39 was a study in controlled power. Dark hair perfectly styled, grey eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched, and a suit that probably cost more than Sierra's monthly rent. But it was the invisible wall around him that truly set him apart. The way people unconsciously stepped back when he entered a room, the way conversations died when he approached. "The Morrison files," Sierra said simply, placing the portfolio on his desk without getting too close. She'd learned that lesson on her first day. Draven's eyes flicked to her briefly, a fraction of a second before focusing on the documents. "Any complications?" "Their legal team tried to renegotiate the patent clauses. I handled it." Sierra remained standing, hands clasped behind her back. Professional, distant, the way he preferred. "And they accepted our terms." For the first time that morning, something resembling approval crossed his features. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but Sierra caught it. She'd become an expert at reading Draven Callaway's barely there expressions. "There's a board meeting at 9, he said, opening the portfolio. "Cancel my lunch with Henderson. Move the Seattle call to 3. "Already done." Sierra pulled out her tablet, scrolling through his schedule. "I also took the liberty of pushing back your meeting with Dr. Ramirez. She called this morning. Her research team needs another week for the clinical trial data." Draven looked up then, really looked at her. Sierra felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the one she'd been trying to ignore for months. There was something about the way he studied people, as if he could see straight through to their secrets. "You anticipated my decision." It wasn't a question, but Sierra nodded anyway. "You've been waiting for those trial results for 6 weeks. Another week won't matter if it means cleaner data." Most people would have simply delivered the message and waited for instructions. "I'm not most people, Mr. Callaway." The words hung between them for a moment. Sierra watched as Draven's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd crossed some invisible line, not the physical one he'd drawn around himself, but something else, something deeper. He stood abruptly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. His hands were clasped behind his back, shoulders rigid with tension Sierra couldn't name. "On your first day," he said without turning around, "I gave you one rule." Sierra's pulse quickened. She remembered that day perfectly, the way he'd looked at her with those calculating grey eyes, the careful distance he'd maintained, even while shaking her hand. "Never touch me," she whispered. "Never touch me," he confirmed, his voice barely audible. No handshakes, no congratulatory pats on the shoulder, no accidental brushes in the hallway. Nothing. Sierra had thought it was arrogance at first, another rich man's eccentricity. But over the months she'd noticed other things. The way he tensed when the cleaning lady got too close, how he always chose the seat at the far end of conference tables, the barely concealed panic in his eyes when an overeager client tried to embrace him after signing a deal. "I remember," Sierra said softly. Draven finally turned, and for just a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped. Sierra saw something raw and wounded in his eyes, something that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "Good," he said, the mask sliding back into place. "Because some rules exist for reasons beyond understanding." He walked back to his desk, but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood there, staring at the Morrison files as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Calloway?" Sierra asked. "No." But as Sierra turned to leave, Draven's voice stopped her at the door. "Sierra." She looked back, surprised. He rarely used her first name. "Thank you for anticipating my needs." There was something in his tone, something that made Sierra's heart skip. But before she could analyze it, he'd already turned back to his work, dismissing her with the same cold efficiency he showed everyone else. Sierra left the office, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Something small but significant. And in the elevator going down, she wondered what kind of pain could make a man so afraid of human touch that he'd built his entire life around avoiding it. What do you think broke Draven Calloway so completely that he can't bear to be touched? Some people wear their wounds like armor, but even the strongest metal has weak spots. The coffee shop on 5th Street was nothing special. Worn vinyl booths, fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally, and a perpetually broken espresso machine that wheezed with every cup. But it was Sierra's sanctuary. Every morning at 6:45 a.m., she'd sit in the corner booth, nursing a black coffee and organizing her thoughts before facing another day in Draven Calloway's demanding world. This Tuesday morning felt different, though. She couldn't stop thinking about yesterday's moment in his office, the way his voice had softened when he said her name, the glimpse of something vulnerable behind those steel-gray eyes. "The usual, honey?" Margot, the 60-something waitress with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, approached with the coffee pot. "Please." Sierra managed to smile, though her mind remained elsewhere. Margot poured the steaming coffee, then lingered. "You look troubled, sweetie." "Man problems?" Sierra nearly choked on her first sip. "Something like that." "Let me guess. He's complicated." "Complicated doesn't begin to cover it," Sierra thought. Out loud, she said, "You could say that. The complicated ones are always the most worth it." Margot winked. "Trust me, I've been married to one for 37 years. As Margot moved to the next table, Sierra's phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister, Zara. "Doc says I need to come in again. Chest feels tight. Don't worry, probably nothing. Love you." Sierra's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Zara had been dealing with respiratory issues for months, a lingering effect from the pneumonia she'd battled the previous winter. At 19, Zara was supposed to be worried about college finals and boys, not doctor visits and breathing treatments. Sierra typed back quickly, "I'm coming with you." "What time?" "Sierra, no. You have work." "I'm fine." "What time, Zara?" 2 p.m. "But seriously, don't make a big deal." Sierra was already calculating. She could reschedule Draven's lunch meeting, move his afternoon calls, and still make it to the clinic in Queens. She'd have to tell him about the appointment, though. He demanded to know her whereabouts during work hours, not out of possessiveness, but because his entire world functioned on precision and predictability. 30 minutes later, Sierra stood outside Draven's office again, but this time felt nervous in a way that had nothing to do with work. Through the frosted glass, she could see him on a conference call, gesturing sharply at whoever was on the other end of his Bluetooth headset. She knocked softly. 2 minutes, his voice carried through the door, clipped and focused. Sierra waited, using the time to rehearse her words. "Mr. Calloway, I need to leave early today for a family matter." "Nothing serious, just enter." She stepped inside to find Draven ending his call with visible frustration. His usually perfect hair showed signs of his fingers running through it, and his tie was slightly loosened, small tells that indicated the conversation hadn't gone well. "The FDA wants another round of safety data," he said without looking up from his computer screen. 3 months of additional trials, millions in delays. "I'm sorry to hear that." Sierra meant it. She knew how much the new cardiac device meant to him, not just financially, but personally. It was technology that could save thousands of lives. Draven finally looked at her, and Sierra noticed the tension lines around his eyes. "You needed something?" "I have to leave at 1:30 today, family appointment." She kept her voice steady, professional. His gray eyes sharpened slightly. "Everything all right?" The question caught Sierra off guard. In 8 months, Draven had never asked about her personal life. He respected the boundary between professional and private, with the same rigidity he applied to physical space. "Yes, sir. Just a routine doctor visit with my sister. Something flickered across Draven's face, too quick to interpret. Your sister lives in the city? Queens, Astoria. Sierra wondered why she was volunteering information, but something about his tone encouraged her to continue. She's 19, college student. Take the afternoon off, sir? The afternoon off? Draven turned back to his computer, but his fingers weren't moving over the keyboard. If it's routine, you shouldn't feel rushed. Sierra blinked. In her entire tenure as his assistant, Draven had never, not once, told her to take extra time off. When she'd had a stomach flu last month, he'd insisted she work from home rather than miss a full day. Thank you, she said softly. I'll make sure everything is covered before I leave. Sierra. She paused at the door, heart doing that familiar skip at the sound of her name in his voice. If it's not routine, if there are complications, don't worry about tomorrow's schedule. Sierra turned to face him, but Draven was staring intensely at his computer screen, jaw tight with an emotion she couldn't name. Mr. Calloway, you take care of everyone else, he said quietly. Make sure someone takes care of you. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning Sierra didn't dare examine too closely. Before she could respond, Draven's phone rang, and he answered it with his usual brusque efficiency. Dismissed, Sierra left the office, but her heart was racing. Twice in 2 days, Draven Calloway had shown her glimpses of the man behind the armor, the man who noticed things, who cared, even if he couldn't show it the way normal people did. Later, in the clinic waiting room in Queens, Sierra sat holding Zara's hand while they waited for test results. The familiar smell of disinfectant and the sound of squeaky linoleum under nurses' shoes brought back memories she'd rather forget. Childhood visits to emergency rooms, social workers with fake smiles, the constant fear of being separated from the only family she had left. You're squeezing my hand pretty tight there, sis, Zara said with a gentle smile. At 19, she had Sierra's same warm brown eyes but a lighter spirit that hadn't been weighed down by years of responsibility. Sorry. Sierra loosened her grip but didn't let go completely. I'm okay, you know. Whatever this is, we'll handle it like we always do. Sierra nodded, but her phone buzzed with a text that made her heart stop. Dr. Martinez wants to see you both. Room 3. As they walked down the sterile hallway, Sierra found herself thinking about Draven's words. Make sure someone takes care of you. For so long, she'd been the one doing the caring, the one holding everything together, but sitting in that doctor's office, waiting to hear if her sister, her only real family, was going to be okay, Sierra realized how desperately she wished someone would take care of her, just once. And strangely, the face that came to mind wasn't that of a friend or potential boyfriend, but of a man with grey eyes who was afraid to let anyone get close enough to touch him. The hardest truths are always delivered in the quietest voices. Pulmonary fibrosis. 2 words that changed everything. Sierra stared at Dr. Martinez, a soft-spoken woman with gentle hands and eyes that had delivered too much bad news over the years. The fluorescent lights in the small examination room buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Zara's pale face. I don't understand, Zara whispered, her hand finding Sierra's. I'm 19. I run marathons. I don't even smoke. Dr. Martinez pulled up X-rays on the wall-mounted screen. Sierra saw the cloudy patches in her sister's lungs, like storm clouds gathering where there should only be clear sky. Sometimes these things just happen, the doctor explained gently. The scarring appears to be progressive but caught early. With treatment, we can slow the progression significantly. Treatment, Sierra repeated, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. What kind of treatment? Anti-fibrotic medications, breathing therapies, possibly oxygen support down the line. The good news is that Zara is young and otherwise healthy. We have time. Time. Such a small word to carry such enormous weight. How much time? Zara asked the question Sierra couldn't voice. Years. Many years with proper care. Dr. Martinez's smile was warm but professional. This isn't a death sentence, Zara. It's a challenge we're going to manage together. After scheduling follow-up appointments and collecting prescriptions that cost more than Sierra's grocery budget, the sisters found themselves on the subway back to Manhattan. The rush-hour crowd pressed around them, everyone absorbed in their phones or books, oblivious to the fact that Sierra's world had just tilted off its axis. I can't afford to be sick, Zara said suddenly, staring out the grimy train window. What do you mean? College, the scholarship, my internship at the museum. Zara's voice cracked slightly. I can't be the sick sister who ruins your life, Sierra. You've already given up so much for me. Sierra turned to face her sister fully. You listen to me, Zara Hollow. You're not ruining anything. We're going to figure this out like we always do. But even as she said the words, Sierra's mind was racing through calculations. Medication costs, specialist visits, the possibility that Zara might not be able to work part-time jobs anymore. Sierra's own salary was decent, but not enough to cover everything they'd need. By the time Sierra returned to her small apartment in Brooklyn, it was nearly 8 p.m. She sat on her threadbare couch, staring at the stack of medical pamphlets Dr. Martinez had given them, when her phone rang. "Hello? It's Draven." Sierra's pulse quickened. Draven never called her personal phone. He barely called her work phone, preferring emails and text messages. "Mr. Calloway, is everything all right?" A pause. Then, "How did the appointment go?" The simple question nearly undid her. Sierra pressed her free hand to her eyes, fighting back tears she'd been holding in all afternoon. "Not routine," she managed to say. Another pause. Longer this time. "Do you need tomorrow off?" "No, Sierra's voice broke slightly. "I need to work. I need the routine." "Sierra." The way he said her name was different, softer, almost careful. "What can I do?" The question hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had asked what they could do for her? When was the last time she'd been allowed to not be the strong one? "Nothing," she whispered. "There's nothing anyone can do." But that wasn't entirely true. There was one thing Draven could do, though she'd never ask. He could hold her, just for a minute. Let her cry against someone else's shoulder instead of carrying this weight alone. Of course, that was the one thing he couldn't do, the one thing he'd never be able to do. "I'll see you in the morning," she said instead. "Sierra, I'm okay, Mr. Calloway, thank you for calling." She hung up before he could respond, then immediately regretted it. She stared at the phone, wondering if she should call back and apologize for being abrupt. But what would she say? How could she explain that his simple concern had cracked something inside her that she couldn't afford to let break? The next morning, Sierra arrived at the office 15 minutes early, as always. She'd spent extra time on her makeup, covering the dark circles under her eyes and the puffiness from the tears she'd finally allowed herself to shed. Professional armor, her foster mother used to call it. The mask you wear when the world expects you to function regardless of what's breaking inside. But when she stepped off the elevator, she found Draven waiting by her desk. He looked like he hadn't slept. His usually immaculate hair was slightly disheveled, and his tie wasn't perfectly straight. In his hands was a white paper bag from the coffee shop on 5th Street. "Your usual," he said, extending the bag toward her. "Black coffee, no sugar." Sierra stared at him. "You went to Margot's? I wanted to make sure you had breakfast." Such a simple gesture, but coming from a man who maintained careful distance from everyone, it felt monumental. Sierra took the bag, careful not to let their fingers brush, and found not just coffee but also a blueberry muffin, her favorite, though she'd never told him that. "How did you know about the muffin?" "You eat them sometimes at your desk." "I noticed." Draven's grey eyes searched her face with an intensity that made Sierra's breath catch. "I also noticed you've been skipping meals lately." He noticed. Draven Calloway, who seemed to exist in his own isolated world, had been paying attention to her eating habits. "Thank you," she said softly. They stood there for a moment, the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the empty office. Sierra was acutely aware of the space between them, close enough to touch if either of them dared to bridge that gap. "The Morrison account needs—" Draven started to speak, then stopped. His jaw tightened, and Sierra recognized the look of a man fighting an internal battle. "Sir? Forget the Morrison account." He turned toward his office, then paused. "If you need to leave early again, don't ask permission. Just go." As he walked away, Sierra called after him. "Mr. Calloway?" He stopped but didn't turn around. "Why are you being so kind to me?" For a long moment, he stood perfectly still. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, Sierra had to strain to hear it. "Because someone should be." And as he disappeared into his office, Sierra realized that sometimes the most meaningful touches aren't physical at all. They're the moments when someone sees your pain and chooses to care. The most dangerous thing about walls is that sometimes you forget why you built them. 3 weeks had passed since Zara's diagnosis, and Sierra had perfected the art of functioning while falling apart. She arrived early, stayed late, and managed Draven's impossible schedule with her usual efficiency. But the cracks were showing, in the way she sometimes stared blankly at her computer screen, in how her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking, In the prescription bottles she kept hidden in her desk drawer next to emergency cash, she was slowly depleting. On this particular Thursday, Sierra sat in the empty break room at 6:30 a.m., staring at her phone. The text from Zara had come at 5:47 a.m. "Can't breathe right, going to ER, don't panic, we'll call later." Don't panic, as if that were possible. Sierra had called the hospital twice already. Both times she'd been told that Zara was being evaluated and couldn't take calls. The not knowing was worse than any diagnosis. "You're here early." Sierra looked up to find Draven standing in the doorway, holding his usual espresso cup. He was impeccably dressed as always, but his eyes immediately went to her phone, then to her face. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. Draven entered the break room, something Sierra had never seen him do before. He typically avoided communal spaces, preferring the isolation of his office. But here he was, pouring himself another coffee from the machine that probably hadn't been cleaned in weeks. "Bad news?" he asked, nodding toward her phone. Sierra hesitated. Draven had been kinder these past few weeks. Small gestures that probably meant nothing to him, but everything to her. But she couldn't keep burdening him with her problems. He was her boss, not her friend. Certainly not her, whatever her heart kept hoping he might become. "Just family stuff," she said. Draven sat down across from her, actually sat down, in the break room, at the cheap plastic table with mismatched chairs that probably cost less than his morning coffee. Sierra stared at him. "Mr. Calloway?" "Your sister," he said. It wasn't a question. "She went to the emergency room this morning. Breathing problems." The words came out flat, emotionless. If she let any feeling into them, she'd break. Draven was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with that intense focus she'd come to know so well. "Which hospital?" "Mount Sinai, Queens. But I can't leave. The board meeting is today, and the Peterson presentation can wait." "Sir, you've been preparing for this deal for months." Sierra, the way he said her name, stopped her mid-sentence. "When did you last eat?" She blinked. Yesterday, I think." "When did you last sleep?" "Really sleep?" Sierra couldn't answer that. She'd been existing on 3-hour naps between worry spirals and phone calls to insurance companies. Draven pulled out his phone. "Cancel everything today, all of it." "Mr. Calloway, you can't." "I can, and I am." He was already typing, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. "Phillips can handle the Peterson meeting. The board can reschedule." Sierra watched in disbelief as Draven Calloway, a man who scheduled bathroom breaks and treated every minute like a precious commodity, cleared his entire day without blinking. "Why?" she whispered. He looked up from his phone, and for a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped completely. Sierra saw exhaustion in his grey eyes, and something else, something that looked like pain. "Because I know what it's like to sit in hospital waiting rooms alone," he said quietly, "and I know what it does to you." The confession hung between them like a bridge. Sierra wasn't sure she should cross. "Mr. Calloway." "Draven." He stood up, straightening his tie in that habitual gesture she'd seen 1,000 times. "When we're not in the office, you can call me Draven. When we're not in the office." As if there would be a we outside these walls, as if he was planning to come with her. 20 minutes later, Sierra found herself in the passenger seat of Draven's sleek black Tesla, watching Queens blur past the window. He drove with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, but she noticed how his knuckles were white against the steering wheel. "You don't like hospitals," she observed. "No. Is that why you're helping me? Because you understand?" Draven was quiet for so long that Sierra thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My mother spent her last 3 months in a place like this. I was 17, sat in those waiting rooms every day after school, waiting for updates that got progressively worse." Sierra's heart clenched. "I'm sorry. Cancer. Started in her lungs, spread everywhere." His jaw tightened. "The last time I held someone's hand was in that hospital room, watching the machines go silent." The admission hit Sierra like a physical blow. The last time I held someone's hand. 22 years ago. 22 years of avoiding human touch because it was connected to the worst moment of his life. "That's why you can't," she started, then stopped. "Why I can't be touched." "Yes." Draven's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sierra heard the pain underneath. "Every time someone reaches for me, I'm 17 again watching her die." They pulled into the hospital parking lot, and Draven turned off the engine. For a moment they sat in silence, surrounded by the sterile white walls of a place that held too many memories for both of them. "You didn't have to come," Sierra said softly. Yes, I did. Why? Draven turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Sierra saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Because somewhere along the way your well-being became more important to me than my own comfort. The words settled between them like a confession neither of them was ready for. Sierra felt tears threatening, not just for Zara, not just for the mounting medical bills and sleepless nights, but for this man who was fighting decades of trauma just to sit beside her in a hospital parking lot. Draven, she whispered. We should go in, he said quickly, reaching for the door handle. Your sister needs you. But as they walked toward the hospital entrance, Sierra noticed how Draven positioned himself slightly behind her, close enough to offer support, but far enough away to maintain his boundaries. And she realized that sometimes the greatest acts of love come from people who give what they can, even when it costs them everything they have. Inside the automatic doors, Sierra couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. For Zara, for herself, and for the man walking beside her who had just revealed the deepest wound of his carefully guarded heart. Sometimes the most intimate moments happen in the spaces we can't cross. The waiting room at Mount Sinai, Queens, smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Sierra sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across from her, Draven occupied his own chair with characteristic precision, back straight, legs parallel, hands resting on his thighs as if he were conducting a board meeting instead of waiting for news about a 19-year-old girl's lungs. But Sierra noticed the details others would miss, the way his jaw tightened every time a doctor walked past, how his breathing became deliberately controlled when the PA system crackled to life, the almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand that he kept trying to still. She's been back there for 2 hours, Sierra whispered, more to herself than to him. Emergency departments move slowly, Draven replied, especially when they're being thorough. His voice carried that calm authority that had commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors, but Sierra heard the undercurrent of someone who'd spent too many hours in rooms just like this one. Mr. Calloway, Draven, she corrected herself, still getting used to the intimacy of his first name. You don't have to stay. I know this can't be easy for you. Draven turned to look at her, and Sierra was struck by how the harsh fluorescent lighting carved shadows under his eyes, making him look younger somehow, vulnerable. I'm not leaving you here alone. The simple statement hit Sierra harder than any elaborate declaration could have. She studied his profile as he watched a young mother trying to comfort a crying toddler across the room. There was something in his expression, a flicker of old pain, mixed with something softer. What was she like? Sierra asked quietly. Your mother. Draven was silent for so long that Sierra thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the careful tone of someone handling fragile memories. Brilliant. She was a biochemist, one of the first women to head a research team at Columbia. She used to bring me to her lab on weekends when I was small. His lips curved in what might have been a smile. I thought she was a magician, the way she could look at compounds and know exactly how they'd interact. She's why you went into biomedical technology. She's why I do everything. Draven's hands tightened slightly on his thighs. Every device we develop, every life we potentially save, it's because I couldn't save her. The confession settled between them like a sacred trust. Sierra wanted desperately to reach for him, to offer the kind of comfort that came from human contact. But she understood now that the space between them wasn't empty. It was filled with 22 years of grief and self-protection. Ms. Hollow. They both looked up to see a young doctor in scrubs approaching. Dr. Patel, according to his badge, with kind eyes and the slightly rumpled look of someone who'd been working long shifts. How is she? Sierra stood so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair. Stable. The inflammation in her lungs caused some temporary restriction, but we've got her on a nebulizer treatment that's helping significantly. Dr. Patel's smile was genuinely reassuring. She's asking for you. Sierra felt her legs go weak with relief. Beside her, she heard Draven release a breath he'd been holding. Can I see her? Of course. Room 314. She'll probably be discharged this evening once we're sure the breathing treatment has done its job. As Dr. Patel walked away, Sierra turned to Draven. Thank you for being here, for everything. I don't know how to... Don't. He stood as well, and for a moment they faced each other in that sterile waiting room, surrounded by other people's fears and hopes. You don't need to thank me for caring about you. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Sierra felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of feelings she'd been trying to ignore for months. I should go see her, she said softly. Yes, But Draven didn't move, and neither did Sierra. They stood there, 3 feet apart, and Sierra could feel the pull between them like gravity. She wondered what would happen if she stepped forward, if she reached out, if she tried to bridge the space that Draven had spent decades building. Instead, she turned toward the elevator, hyper-aware of his presence behind her. Room 314 was small and bright, with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the parking lot. Zara looked impossibly young against the white hospital linens, but her color was better, and the frightening wheeze in her breathing had eased. "Hey you," Sierra said, settling into the bedside chair. "You look terrible," Zara said with a weak smile. "When's the last time you slept? Pot. Meet kettle." Sierra reached for her sister's hand, grateful for the simple human contact. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Embarrassed. I panicked this morning when I couldn't catch my breath after climbing the stairs to my apartment." Zara's eyes moved to the doorway where Draven stood, maintaining his careful distance. "Is that your boss? The infamous Mr. Calloway?" "He drove me here." Zara's eyebrows rose. "He drove you. The billionaire CEO drove you to Queens." "It's complicated, I'll bet." Zara studied Draven with the shameless curiosity of someone who'd been Sierra's confidant since childhood. "He's been standing in that doorway for 10 minutes, watching you like you might disappear." Sierra glanced back at Draven, who was indeed watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly, but not before she saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. "Zara, this is Draven Calloway." "Draven, my sister Zara." "Miss Hollow?" Draven nodded formally from his position by the door. "I'm glad you're feeling better. Thank you for taking care of my sister," Zara said, and Sierra heard the double meaning in her words. "She doesn't let people do that very often." "I'm learning that," Draven replied, and something in his tone made Sierra's cheeks warm. A nurse bustled in to check Zara's vitals, and Sierra found herself stepping back, directly into Draven's space. For one heart-stopping moment, she felt the warmth of him behind her, close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the careful control in his breathing. "Sorry," she whispered, starting to move away. But Draven's voice stopped her. "It's okay." 2 simple words, but they carried the weight of a man who never said it was okay to be close to him. Sierra remained where she was, hyper-aware of the mere inches between them, of how his presence seemed to anchor her in a way she'd never experienced before. "The discharge papers should be ready in about an hour," the nurse said cheerfully. "Dr. Patel wants to see her breathing completely normal before she goes home." After the nurse left, Zara looked between Sierra and Draven with the knowing expression of someone who'd just witnessed something significant. "So," she said with a slight smile, "this is definitely complicated." And as Sierra stood there, caught between her sister's perceptive gaze and Draven's quiet presence behind her, she realized that some complications were worth every risk they brought. The most honest conversations happen when the rest of the world goes quiet. It was nearly 9 p.m. when Sierra finally returned to the office to retrieve her purse and jacket. The building was almost empty, just the night security guard at the front desk and the soft hum of cleaning crews working their way through the lower floors. Sierra had expected to find the executive level dark and abandoned, but light spilled from under Draven's office door. She knocked softly, more out of courtesy than necessity. "Come in." Sierra pushed open the door to find Draven at his desk, still in his dress shirt, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The sight of him slightly disheveled did something dangerous to her pulse. "You should go home," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's been a long day." Says the woman who came back to the office at 9 p.m. Draven looked up from his laptop, and Sierra caught the ghost of a smile on his lips. "How is Zara?" "Good? Better. She's staying at my apartment tonight, so I can keep an eye on her." Sierra stepped further into the office, noting the takeout containers on his desk. "You ate dinner here?" "Thai from that place on Lexington. There's extra if you're hungry." The casual domesticity of the offer caught Sierra off guard. "You ordered extra? I thought you might not have eaten." Draven's gray eyes met hers. "I was right, wasn't I?" Sierra realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. The day had been consumed with hospital visits, pharmacy runs, and getting Zara settled at home. "Maybe a little. Sit." It wasn't quite a command, but it carried enough authority that Sierra found herself settling into the chair across from his desk. Draven pushed a container toward her. "Pad Thai, mild spice." "How did you know I like Pad Thai?" "You've ordered it twice for office lunches. You always ask for mild spice but extra lime." Draven's matter-of-fact delivery made the observation seem casual, but Sierra felt her heart skip. He'd been paying attention to details she didn't even know she had. They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sierra found herself studying Draven in this unguarded moment, the way he ate methodically, the slight furrow in his brow as he read emails, the unconscious gesture of running his hand through his hair when something frustrated him. "Can I ask you something?" Sierra said finally. Draven looked up. "Yes, today, in the hospital room, when I stepped back and you said it was okay." Sierra searched for the right words. "That was a big deal for you, wasn't it?" Draven set down his chopsticks and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, Sierra thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I haven't been that close to another person in over 20 years. "How close?" "Close enough to feel your warmth, close enough to know that you use jasmine shampoo." His eyes found hers. "Close enough that if you had leaned back another inch, you would have been touching me." Sierra's breath caught. "Were you afraid?" "Terrified," Draven admitted, "but not of being touched. I was afraid that if you moved away, I'd follow you." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Sierra felt something flutter in her chest. Hope, desire, fear, all tangled together. "Draven, I know this is complicated," he said quickly. "I know I'm not normal. I know I can't give you what most men could." "Stop." Sierra's voice was firm enough to cut through his self-deprecation. "Don't tell me what you can't give me. Tell me what you can." Draven stared at her, and Sierra saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made behind those careful grey eyes. "I can give you honesty," he said finally. "I can tell you that somewhere between your first day and today, you became the most important person in my world. I can give you loyalty, protection, everything I have, except the one thing you probably need most, which is to be held when you're scared, to be comforted with touch instead of words." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "To be loved the way you deserve to be loved." Sierra felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the raw vulnerability in his words. "What if I told you that the way you love me already is exactly what I need?" "What do you mean?" Sierra stood up, moving around the desk until she was standing beside his chair, not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt electric. "You drove me to the hospital, even though hospitals are where your worst memories live. You noticed that I like pad thai and jasmine shampoo. You cleared your entire schedule because I was scared about my sister." Sierra's voice grew stronger with each word. "You've been taking care of me for months in ways I didn't even realize. That's love, Draven. Maybe it doesn't look like everyone else's version, but it's real, and it's yours, and it's perfect." Draven looked up at her, and Sierra saw something break open in his expression. "Sierra, I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you to touch me before you're ready, if you're ever ready." Sierra's heart was pounding, but she'd come too far to stop now. "I'm just asking you to stop pushing me away because you think you're not enough." They stared at each other in the soft glow of his desk lamp, the city sprawling endlessly beyond the windows. Sierra could hear the cleaning crew's vacuum in the distance, the gentle hum of the building's heating system, the sound of her own pulse in her ears. Slowly, deliberately, Draven reached up with one hand. His fingers hovered inches from her cheek, close enough that Sierra could feel the warmth of his skin, but not quite touching. "I want to," he whispered. "God, I want to so badly it physically hurts." "Then do it." For a moment that lasted forever. His hand trembled in the space between them. Sierra held perfectly still, afraid to breathe, afraid to move, afraid to do anything that might break this fragile moment. But then Draven's phone rang, sharp and intrusive in the quiet office. The spell broke, and he pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. "I should," he started, reaching for the phone. "Leave it," Sierra said softly. But the moment had passed. Draven answered the call with his usual professional efficiency, and Sierra stepped back, giving him space to conduct whatever business couldn't wait until morning. As she listened to him discuss quarterly projections and board meeting schedules, Sierra realized that they were balanced on the edge of something that could change everything. The question was whether either of them was brave enough to take the leap. And as Sierra quietly gathered her things to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that the next time they found themselves alone like this, one of them would have to decide if love was worth the risk of breaking down walls that had taken decades to build. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in the spaces between heartbeats. The next morning arrived grey and drizzling, matching Sierra's mood perfectly. She'd spent the night replaying every moment from Draven's office, the way his hand had trembled inches from her face, the raw honesty in his voice when he'd called her the most important person in his world. But mostly, she'd thought about that phone call that had shattered the moment, and how quickly he'd retreated back into his professional shell. Now sitting at her desk at 7:15 a.m. with rain streaking the windows, Sierra tried to focus on quarterly reports instead of the memory of jasmine shampoo and the sound of her own name spoken like a prayer. "You're early." Sierra looked up to find Draven standing beside her desk, looking as perfectly composed as ever. But she'd learned to read the subtle signs, the slightly tighter set of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh before stilling. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. "The Peterson meeting has been moved to this afternoon. The Seoul conference call is at 10. His voice was purely professional, but his eyes lingered on her face. "How is Zara this morning?" "Better. She went to her morning classes." Sierra hesitated, then added, "She asked me to thank you again for yesterday." "It wasn't." "It was," Sierra interrupted gently. "It was everything." For a moment, Draven's carefully controlled expression wavered. But before either of them could say anything more, the elevator dinged and Vivienne Blackthorne stepped out. Vivienne was everything Sierra wasn't. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Sierra's monthly salary. She was also Draven's ex-fiancée, though Sierra had only learned this from office gossip and financial magazine articles that mentioned their amicable separation 3 years ago. "Draven, darling," Vivienne's voice carried the cultured tones of old money and Ivy League education. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by without an appointment." Sierra watched Draven's face become a mask of polite indifference. "Vivienne, what brings you here?" "Business, of course." Vivienne's smile was perfect and cold. "Daddy's foundation is looking for a biotech partner for our new cardiac research initiative. Naturally, I thought of you first." Sierra felt something twist in her stomach. The Blackthorne Foundation was one of the most prestigious medical research organizations in the country. A partnership with them would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "I'll need to review the proposal," Draven said diplomatically. "Of course, but I was hoping we could discuss it over dinner. Tonight?" Vivienne's hand moved as if to touch Draven's arm, then stopped, a gesture so automatic it spoke of long familiarity. "Just like old times." Sierra's chest tightened. She tried to look busy with her computer, but she could feel both sets of eyes on her. Vivienne's calculating, Draven's unreadable. "I don't think that's appropriate," Draven said finally. "Don't be silly, it's business." Vivienne's laugh sounded like champagne bubbles. "Besides, I know how much you hate mixing personal with professional. This would be purely about the Foundation's needs." Sierra stood abruptly. "I'll get those files you wanted, Mr. Calloway." She walked toward the file room on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of the conversation continuing behind her. Through the glass partition, she could see Vivienne moving closer to Draven, her body language intimate despite his obvious discomfort. In the file room, Sierra pressed her back against the closed door and tried to breathe. She had no right to feel this way. Draven wasn't hers. Last night had been a moment of vulnerability, nothing more. If he wanted to have dinner with his ex-fiancée, Sierra. She jumped. Draven stood in the doorway, his expression troubled. "The files aren't in here," she said weakly. "There are no files." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Are you all right?" "Fine." "Why wouldn't I be fine?" Sierra's voice sounded brittle even to her own ears. "Because you looked like you'd seen a ghost when Vivienne mentioned dinner." Sierra forced a laugh. "It's none of my business who you have dinner with." "Isn't it?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they hadn't said last night. Sierra stared at him, searching his face for clues to what he was thinking. "I told her no," Draven said quietly. "You should reconsider. It sounds like an important opportunity." "Sierra, really, Mr. Calloway, I'm sure the Blackthorne Foundation partnership would be incredible for the company." Sierra was babbling now, but she couldn't seem to stop. "And she's beautiful, sophisticated, the kind of woman who—" "Stop!" Draven's voice was sharp enough to cut through her rambling. "Just stop!" He took a step closer, and Sierra found herself backed against the file cabinets, not touching, never touching, but close enough that she could see the storm brewing in his grey eyes. "You think I want her? Don't you?" The words came out as a whisper. "I want someone who notices when I skip meals, who brings light into rooms just by entering them, who holds her sister's hand in hospital waiting rooms and pretends she's not falling apart." His voice dropped lower with each word. "I want someone who looks at me like I'm worth saving, even when I can't touch her the way she deserves." Sierra's heart was hammering against her ribs. "Draven." Vivian and I ended because I couldn't give her what she needed, what any normal person would need. His jaw tightened. I won't make that mistake again. What if I told you that you're wrong, that you're exactly what I need? Then I'd say you deserve better than a man who's too broken to hold you when you cry. The pain in his voice was raw, honest, devastating. Sierra wanted to reach for him, to show him how wrong he was, but she knew that even the gesture would send him retreating behind his walls again. I should get back, Draven said, stepping away. Vivienne is waiting for an answer about the foundation partnership. Are you going to take the meeting? I don't know. He paused at the door. It would be the smart business decision. After he left, Sierra remained in the file room for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Draven wanted her. He'd said as much. But he also believed he wasn't enough for her. And now his perfect ex-fiancée was back, offering him both business success and a relationship uncomplicated by his inability to touch. When Sierra finally returned to her desk, she found a note in elegant handwriting. Such a lovely girl. I can see why Draven is so fond of his little assistant. V. Sierra crumpled the note, but the words echoed in her mind. Little assistant. As if that's all she was. All she would ever be. Through Draven's office window, she could see him on a phone call, his free hand pressed to his temple in a gesture of frustration or exhaustion. Sierra wondered if he was thinking about Vivian's offer, about the partnership that could transform his company, about the woman who had once been close enough to touch him without fear. And as the rain continued to streak the windows, Sierra realized that sometimes loving someone means watching them choose what's practical over what might be possible. Some decisions can only be made when everything else falls apart. Sierra stared at the phone in her hand, reading the text message for the fourth time. The words hadn't changed, but somehow she kept hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. Emergency surgery scheduled for tomorrow, 6 a.m. Insurance denied coverage. Need $47,000 by tonight or they postpone indefinitely. I'm scared, Sierra. Z. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. $47,000. It might as well have been $47 million. Sierra's savings account had exactly $3,200, and her credit cards were already maxed out from Zara's previous treatments. The office around her seemed to blur at the edges. Through the glass walls, she could see Draven in his conference room with the Blackthorn Foundation executives, Vivian sitting close enough to him that their shoulders almost touched. The meeting had been going on for 2 hours. The partnership was probably already decided. Sierra stood on unsteady legs and walked to the bathroom, where she splashed cold water on her face and tried to think. There had to be something she could do, someone she could call, some way to find nearly $50,000 in the next 6 hours. But even as she ran through possibilities in her mind, Sierra knew the truth. There was no magical solution, no fairy godmother with a checkbook, just her, alone, watching her sister's life hang in the balance while she stood helpless. When she returned to her desk, she found a voicemail from the hospital's financial department. The surgery scheduler wanted to discuss payment arrangements for Zara's procedure. Sierra deleted it without listening to the whole message. Sierra? She looked up to find Marcus Webb, one of the junior executives, standing by her desk with a concerned expression. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Fine, Sierra managed. Just tired. Marcus glanced toward the conference room where Draven was still deep in discussion with the Foundation representatives. Big day for the boss, huh? This partnership could change everything for the company. I'm sure it could. Rumor is he and the Ice Queen might be getting back together too. Marcus lowered his voice conspiratorially. They make sense, you know? Power couple and all that. She actually understands his world. Sierra felt something crack inside her chest. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do. But she couldn't concentrate on work. The numbers on her computer screen blurred together as she tried to calculate impossible equations. If she sold everything she owned, if she borrowed against her 401k, if she took out every loan available, it still wouldn't be enough. At 5:30 p.m., the conference room finally emptied. Sierra watched through the glass as Vivienne shook hands with her colleagues, her smile radiant with victory. The partnership was clearly a done deal. Draven walked Vivienne to the elevator, and Sierra could see them talking in low, intimate tones. When the elevator doors closed, Draven stood there for a moment before turning back toward his office. His eyes found Sierra's across the space, and something in his expression shifted. He crossed to her desk with quick, purposeful strides. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything's fine. Sierra's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Sierra. Draven's tone carried that authority she'd come to know so well. What happened? For a moment Sierra considered lying, maintaining the professional distance that had somehow eroded over the past few months, but she was too tired, too scared, too desperate to pretend anymore. Zara needs emergency surgery tomorrow morning. The insurance company denied coverage. Sierra's voice broke slightly. I don't have the money. Draven went very still. How much? $47,000. When do they need it? Tonight? Or they postpone the surgery indefinitely? Sierra wiped at her eyes, angry at herself for crying in front of him. I'm sorry. This isn't your problem. I shouldn't have... Stop apologizing. Draven was already pulling out his phone. What hospital? Draven, no, I can't let you... Mount Sinai, Queens. Dr. Martinez is the attending physician. He was typing rapidly, not waiting for her answer. The surgery scheduler needs payment confirmation. You can't just pay for my sister's surgery. Yes, I can. He finished typing and looked at her with an intensity that took her breath away. It's done. The hospital will have payment confirmation within the hour. Sierra stared at him, overwhelmed by gratitude and something that felt dangerously close to love. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Draven's voice was quiet. Just let her be okay. I'll pay you back. Every penny. It might take years, but I promise... Sierra. He stepped closer and she could see something vulnerable in his grey eyes. Do you really think I care about the money? Then why? Why would you do this for us? Draven was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing it. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of everything he'd never been able to say. Because I love you. Because I've been in love with you for months. And watching you suffer is killing me. His hands clenched at his sides. Because if something happened to Zara, it would destroy you, and I won't let that happen. Sierra felt her world tilt on its axis. Draven, I know I can't give you what you need. I know Vivian makes more sense. Stop. Sierra stepped forward, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You think Vivian makes more sense than this? Than you saving my sister's life? Than you knowing exactly what I need before I even ask? But I can't. Touch me? Sierra's voice was soft but steady. So what? You think love is just about physical contact? You think holding hands is more intimate than what you just did for my family? Draven stared at her, and Sierra could see him fighting some internal battle. The foundation partnership, she said suddenly. So you accepted it, didn't you? You're getting back together with Vivian. The partnership, yes, it's good for the company. Draven's jaw tightened. But Vivian and I, there is no Vivian and I. There never will be again. Because of your condition? Because she isn't you. The words hung between them like a confession and a question all at once. Sierra felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for the first time in hours, they weren't tears of despair. I love you too, she whispered. I love that you notice when I skip meals and remember my coffee order and drive me to hospitals even when it scares you. I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart and the way you protect everyone around you. She took another step closer. I love you exactly as you are. Draven's breathing had become uneven. Sierra, you don't have to touch me for this to be real. You don't have to change for me to want this. Sierra's voice grew stronger with each word. But you do have to stop punishing yourself for something that isn't your fault. They stood there in the empty office, surrounded by the soft glow of desk lamps and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. Sierra could see the war playing out in Draven's expression, years of self-protection battling against the possibility of something he'd never thought he could have. And in that moment, Sierra realized that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't reaching for someone. It's being brave enough to let them reach for you. The bravest thing you can do is let someone love your broken pieces back together. Sierra stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside Mount Sinai, Queens, watching her breath form small clouds in the frigid February air. It was 5:30 a.m., and Zara had been in surgery for 2 hours. The waiting was killing her, but not as much as the memory of Draven's face when she'd left the office the night before, torn between hope and terror, love and self-preservation. She'd told him she'd be at the hospital early, that he didn't need to come. But as Sierra turned toward the main entrance, she saw a familiar figure emerging from a black Tesla in the parking lot. Draven. He was dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. Dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, no tie. But even in casual clothes, he moved with that controlled precision that had first intimidated her 8 months ago. Now it just made her heart race. I thought you might need coffee, he said as he approached, holding out a steaming cup from their 5th Street place. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did. His grey eyes searched her face in the harsh glow of the hospital's exterior lighting. How are you holding up? Terrified, Sierra admitted, but grateful. Draven, what you did yesterday was what anyone would do. No, it wasn't. Sierra wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, using it as much for comfort as warmth. Most people would have offered sympathy, maybe a small loan. You paid for a life-saving surgery without blinking. Because it was your sister's life. Draven's voice was quiet but intense. Because watching you break would have destroyed me. They walked into the hospital together, finding seats in the same waiting area where they'd sat just days earlier. But everything felt different now. The confessions from the night before hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Dr. Martinez said the surgery could take 4 to 6 hours, Sierra said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair. They're basically rebuilding part of her lung tissue. Draven nodded, but Sierra could see the tension in his shoulders. Hospitals were hard for him under the best circumstances. Being here for hours would be torture. You should go, she said softly. You don't need to put yourself through this. I'm not leaving you alone. Draven, I'm not leaving. His tone brooked no argument. Not today, not anymore. Sierra felt something flutter in her chest at the finality in his voice. What does that mean? Draven was quiet for a long moment, staring at the generic landscape painting on the opposite wall. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man making a decision that would change everything. It means I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting my past dictate my future. He turned to look at her, and Sierra saw something new in his expression, determination mixed with vulnerability. It means I want to try. Try what? Being with you. Really being with you. Draven's hands clenched slightly on his thighs. I may never be able to touch you the way normal couples do, but I want to build something with you anyway. I want morning coffees and late dinners and arguments about the thermostat. I want to be the person you call when you're scared, and the one who celebrates with you when things go right. Sierra's eyes filled with tears. And if I said I wanted all of that too, then I'd ask you to be patient with me, to understand that this is uncharted territory for someone who spent 22 years avoiding intimacy of any kind. And if I said patience is easy, when you're getting everything you actually want, Draven's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean, I don't need you to be like everyone else, Draven. I need you to be you, the man who notices everything, who protects fiercely, who loves quietly but completely. Sierra set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. The man who just admitted he wants morning coffees and arguments about the thermostat. A small smile tugged at the corner of Draven's mouth. You really want to argue about the thermostat with me? I want to argue about everything with you. I want to know if you're a morning person or a night owl, what you eat for breakfast, whether you prefer showers or baths, if you sing in the car when you think no one's listening. I don't sing, Draven said, but his smile was growing. We'll see about that. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the hospital bustling to life around them as the morning shift arrived. Sierra found herself studying Draven's profile, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell slightly across his forehead when he wasn't wearing it perfectly styled. Sierra? His voice was so quiet she almost missed it. Yes? I'm going to try something, and I need you to stay very still. Sierra's heart started racing, but she nodded. Okay. Slowly, carefully, Draven reached out with his right hand. His fingers hovered over her left hand, where it rested on the chair's armrest, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. I can do this, he whispered, more to himself than to her. I can do this. Sierra held perfectly still, afraid to breathe, afraid to do anything that might break this moment. She could see the concentration on Draven's face, the way his jaw tightened with effort, and then, feather-light and trembling, his fingers brushed against hers. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds before Draven jerked his hand back, breathing hard. But in those 3 seconds, Sierra felt everything. The warmth of his skin, the callus on his index finger from his fountain pen, the slight tremor that spoke of how much courage this simple gesture had required. Are you okay? She asked softly. Draven nodded, still breathing heavily. It didn't hurt, it didn't. I thought it would hurt. How did it feel? Like coming alive, he whispered. Like 22 years of holding my breath and finally being able to exhale. Sierra felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Draven, Miss Hollow? They both turned to see Dr. Martinez approaching, still in surgical scrubs but smiling. Sierra's heart leaped. The surgery went perfectly. Zara is in recovery now and her breathing is already significantly improved. Dr. Martinez's smile widened. She's asking for you. Sierra stood on shaky legs, relief flooding through her so intensely she felt lightheaded. "Can I see her?" "Of course. Recovery room 8. She'll be groggy from the anesthesia, but she's completely stable." As Dr. Martinez walked away, Sierra turned to Draven. "Thank you for everything, for being here, for making this possible, for—" "Go," he said gently. "Go see your sister." Sierra started toward the recovery ward, then stopped and looked back. Draven was still sitting in that uncomfortable plastic chair, watching her with an expression of such tender devotion that it took her breath away. "When I come back," she said, "can we try that again? The touching." Draven's smile was small, but real. "I'd like that." And as Sierra walked toward her sister's room, she realized that sometimes the most profound intimacy comes not from perfect moments, but from broken people choosing to be brave together. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. 6 weeks later, Sierra stood in her new apartment in Manhattan's Upper West Side, a place she never could have afforded on her salary, but Draven had insisted was a practical investment in shorter commute times. She was learning that Draven Calloway showed love through practical solutions and quiet gestures that transformed entire lives. The afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as Sierra arranged fresh flowers in a vase, white roses, because Draven had mentioned once that he found their simplicity beautiful. In 30 minutes, he would arrive for their first official dinner together in her space. Their relationship had been a careful dance of gradual intimacy over the past month and a half, coffee dates that stretched into afternoon conversations, work meetings that became something deeper, and moments of almost touching that left them both breathless with possibility. The sound of the doorbell made Sierra's pulse quicken. She opened the door to find Draven standing in the hallway, holding a small wrapped box and looking uncharacteristically nervous. "You're early," she said with a smile. "I couldn't wait." His grey eyes swept over her. She was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and something warm flickered in his expression. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." Sierra stepped back to let him in, hyper-aware of the space between them as he passed. "What's in the box?" "Something for Zara." Draven set the gift on her kitchen counter. "How is she?" "Good. Great, actually. Her breathing tests came back perfect yesterday, and she's back to her full course load at school." Sierra moved to the stove where pasta was simmering. "She wanted me to tell you that she got the internship at the research lab. Apparently, having a recommendation from Draven Calloway carries some weight in the academic world. She earned that internship herself." "Maybe, but you made it possible." Sierra turned to face him, struck again by how different he looked in casual clothes, dark jeans and a soft grey sweater that made his eyes seem lighter. "You've made a lot of things possible." Draven was quiet for a moment, studying her face with that intensity she'd come to love. "Sierra, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "I've been seeing someone. A therapist." Draven's hands clenched slightly at his sides. "Dr. Chen. She specializes in trauma-related touch aversion." Sierra felt her breath catch. "Draven, I want to get better. Not just for you, but for us. For the possibility of us." His voice was steady, but vulnerable. "I want to be able to hold your hand without having a panic attack. I want to hug you when you've had a bad day. I want to be the man who can comfort you the way you deserve to be comforted." Sierra felt tears prick her eyes. "You already comfort me. Every day. But I want to do more. I want to try." Draven took a step closer, and Sierra could see the determination in his expression mixed with something that looked like hope. "Dr. Chen says that with time and work, I might be able to overcome most of the aversion. It won't happen overnight, but you're willing to try. For you, I'm willing to try anything." Sierra moved closer to him, stopping just inches away. "What if I told you that I love you exactly as you are right now? What if I said that every small gesture you've made, bringing me coffee, paying for Zara's surgery, sitting with me in hospital waiting rooms, what if I told you that's already more love than I ever thought I'd receive? Then I'd say you deserve even more, and I'd say that love isn't about what we can't do. It's about what we choose to do." Sierra reached up slowly, telegraphing her movement so Draven could pull away if he needed to. "Can I try something?" Draven nodded, his breathing slightly uneven. Sierra raised her hand to hover just inches from his cheek. "Tell me when you're ready." "I'm ready." Sierra's palm settled against his face, warm and gentle. Draven's eyes fluttered closed, and she could feel a slight tremor run through him. Not fear this time, but something deeper. Relief, recognition, coming home. "How does it feel?" she whispered. Like I've been holding my breath for 22 years, Draven said, his voice rough with emotion. And you just taught me how to breathe again. They stood like that for several moments, Sierra's hand cradling his face, while Draven learned to accept gentle touch without flinching. When his eyes opened again, they were bright with unshed tears. I love you, he said simply. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you see good in broken things. I love you too, Sierra whispered. I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart, and the way you've been brave enough to let me in. Slowly, carefully, Draven raised his own hand to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. The gesture was tentative but deliberate, a conscious choice to bridge the gap that trauma had created. Is this okay? He asked. This is perfect. The timer on the stove chose that moment to go off, breaking the spell. Sierra laughed, reluctantly pulling her hand away to attend to dinner. But when she turned back, Draven was watching her with an expression of such tender devotion that it took her breath away. What? She asked. I just realized something. Draven moved to help her, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. Another small miracle. I spent so many years afraid that being touched would break me. I never considered that the right touch might put me back together. They worked side by side in the kitchen, a comfortable domesticity settling between them. As Sierra served the pasta, Draven opened a bottle of wine, something expensive that he'd probably chosen with the same careful attention he applied to everything else. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. To brave hearts, Sierra countered. They touched glasses, and in that simple gesture Sierra saw their future, not perfect, not without challenges, but real and honest, and built on a foundation of understanding that ran deeper than physical touch ever could. After dinner, they settled on Sierra's couch, maintaining a careful distance that had become comfortable rather than painful. Draven had brought work files and Sierra had a book, but mostly they just enjoyed being in the same space, existing together in the quiet evening light. Sierra? Draven's voice was soft. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, the real me, underneath all the walls and rules and fear. Draven set aside his files and turned to face her fully. For loving me before I knew how to accept it. Thank you for letting me. Sierra closed her book, marking her place carefully. For being brave enough to try. As the sun set outside her windows, painting the room in shades of gold and amber, Sierra realized that some love stories don't end with dramatic kisses or grand gestures. Sometimes they end with quiet moments of recognition, two people choosing each other not despite their scars, but because of their willingness to heal together. And in the space between them on that couch, in the careful distance that was slowly, carefully shrinking, Sierra found everything she'd never dared to hope for. A love that was patient, kind, and brave enough to rewrite the rules of what intimacy could look like. Because sometimes the greatest romance isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who sees you as complete, exactly as you are. 2 years later, the greatest miracles happen in the quiet moments between heartbeats. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the coffee shop on 5th Street, casting golden streaks across the worn vinyl booths that had witnessed 1,000 small dramas. Sierra sat in her usual corner spot, though it wasn't really her spot anymore, not since she'd moved in with Draven 8 months ago. But some habits were too precious to abandon entirely. The usual, honey. Margot approached with the coffee pot, her silver hair now completely white but her smile as warm as ever. Please. Sierra looked up from the tablet where she'd been reviewing the final edits of her manuscript. And maybe one of those blueberry muffins. Coming right up. How's the book coming along? It's finished. Sierra felt a flutter of pride mixed with terror. My editor says it should be in bookstores by Christmas. A real published author right here in my little coffee shop. Margot beamed as she poured the steaming coffee. What's it about again? Love stories that don't look like everyone else's love stories. Sierra wrapped her hands around the warm mug. About people who find their own way to be together. Margot's knowing smile suggested she understood exactly what kind of love story Sierra had been writing. The bell above the door chimed, and Sierra looked up to see Draven entering, scanning the small space until his eyes found hers. Even after 2 years, her heart still did that familiar skip when he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. He was dressed for the office, charcoal suit, silver tie, but there was something different about his posture. Looser, more relaxed. The therapy sessions with Dr. Chen had worked small miracles over the past 1.5 years, not just with his touch aversion, but with the rigid control he'd maintained over every aspect of his life. "You're early," Sierra said as he approached her table. The soul call was cancelled. Draven leaned down and, in a gesture that still felt miraculous every time it happened, pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "I thought I might steal a few minutes with my favorite author." Sierra's cheeks warmed. The casual intimacy of the kiss, the way he said "my favorite author," like it was simply fact, the way he slid into the booth across from her as if he belonged there. It all still felt like a dream she might wake up from. "Zara called this morning," Sierra said, closing her tablet. "She got into the graduate program at Johns Hopkins. Biomedical engineering?" Draven's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's incredible. She'll be brilliant. She wanted me to thank you again for the recommendation letter. She didn't need my recommendation. Her undergraduate work speaks for itself." Draven signaled Margot for his own coffee. "Though I may have mentioned that anyone related to you would be an asset to any program." Sierra felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest, the feeling she got every time Draven revealed how proud he was to be connected to her, how naturally he'd woven himself into the fabric of her small family. "There's something else," Sierra said, suddenly nervous. "About Zara." Draven's expression grew attentive. "What is it?" "She's engaged. To Trevor, that boy from her chemistry class. They want to have the wedding next spring." Sierra paused, watching Draven's face carefully. "She asked if we'd host the reception." "At the penthouse?" "She specifically requested the rooftop garden. Said it's the most romantic place she's ever seen." Sierra bit her lip. "I told her I'd have to ask you, but if it's too much—" "Sierra." Draven reached across the table, covering her hand with his, in a gesture that was now as natural as breathing. "Of course we'll host it. Zara is family. We, family." Two words that Sierra had never taken for granted, and that Draven had learned to embrace with the same careful deliberation he applied to everything else that mattered. "There's one more thing," Sierra said, her pulse quickening. "She asked if you'd walk her down the aisle." Draven went very still. "What? Her father he wasn't in the picture. And you," Sierra's voice grew soft, "you saved her life, Draven. You made her future possible. She can't imagine anyone else giving her away." Sierra watched emotions flicker across Draven's face. Surprise, honor, something that looked suspiciously like tears. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I'd be honored." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, hands linked across the small table, while the coffee shop hummed with morning activity around them. Sierra found herself studying Draven's face, the strong jaw that was no longer always clenched with tension, the grey eyes that had learned to hold warmth instead of walls, the mouth that curved more easily into smiles these days. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "That day in the hospital waiting room, when you first told me about your mother." Sierra turned her hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. "Do you think she would have liked me?" "She would have loved you." Draven's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "She would have seen what I see, someone who makes the people around them braver, kinder, more themselves." "What about us? Would she have understood this?" Draven was quiet for a moment, considering. "My mother was a scientist. She believed that the most beautiful discoveries came from looking at familiar things in completely new ways." His smile was soft. "I think she would have understood that love can be revolutionary just by being honest." Sierra felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish I could have met her. She would have insisted on teaching you her secret recipe for chocolate chip cookies, and she would have asked you 1,000 questions about your book." Draven lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to Sierra's knuckles. She would have been so proud that her son found someone brave enough to love him exactly as he is. Outside the window, Manhattan was waking up, people hurrying to work, street vendors setting up their carts, the endless rhythm of a city that never stopped moving. But inside this small coffee shop, Sierra felt suspended in a moment of perfect contentment. "We should probably head to the office," she said reluctantly. "Probably." But Draven made no move to leave. "Sierra." "Yes?" "Do you ever think about what our story would look like from the outside? A billionaire with severe touch aversion and his assistant who taught him that love doesn't always look like everyone expects it to." Sierra smiled. "It sounds like a romance novel. A good one? The best kind. The kind where two broken people choose to heal together instead of trying to fix each other." Sierra squeezed his hand. "The kind where love wins, but not because it's easy, because it's worth it." Draven stood, pulling her gently to her feet. As they prepared to leave, he paused, turning to face her fully. "Sierra Hollow," he said, his voice carrying that formal tone he used for the most important pronouncements. "You are the love of my life." "Draven Calloway," Sierra replied, matching his solemnity, "you are the love of mine." And as they walked out into the bright morning sunshine, hands linked and hearts full, Sierra realized that some love stories don't end. They just keep beginning over and over, with each choice to stay, each decision to be brave, each moment of choosing love over fear. Because the greatest romance isn't about finding your other half. It's about two whole people choosing to build something beautiful together, one careful touch at a time. Did Sierra and Draven's love story touch your heart the way you hoped it would? Have you ever had to redefine what love looks like in your own life? Thank you for joining Sierra and Draven on their journey to love. May we all find the courage to love and be loved exactly as we are. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.